صباح الخير. I will speak in English, لكن هناك ترجمة فورية من وإلى اللغة العربية. Good morning. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to welcome two eminent visitors to Lebanon and speakers this morning, two high officials of the UN system, the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, who's no stranger to this place, and Henrietta H, who is the Executive Director of UNICEF. Both these eminent personalities have had a long-standing experience in humanitarian work, in advocating the good causes of refugees and children. Filippo Grandi has been the High Commissioner for UNRWA and is familiar with, very familiar, I would say, with the problems of Palestinians and Palestinians of Syria in Lebanon and in the region, but much more. Henrietta H has had a long experience both in the public and private sector. She was administrator of USAID, and I think from that experience there is a lot she knows about humanitarian problems in the world. This is going to be a conversation, so the two speakers will be relatively short, and we'll try to give ample time for exchanges with you all. It's about youth, so we might give a preferential treatment to younger people. So those of you, the dignitaries that sit in the first few rows, should take no offense. And we'll try to close by 11. So opening remarks and then into the conversation. I mean, one has to start with basic, simple facts about youth being 30% of the Arab world's population, which makes this part of the world one of the youngest. While they can bring their talents and benefit their countries, the crisis we know have created extremely unfavorable conditions for them. Now, in this part of the world, many people and groups of people have a right claim to victimhood, but I think younger people and children, I think we can claim on their behalf, but they can also claim an extraordinary victimhood. Not only they have suffered from displacement, but there is a whole lost generation, as some call it, young people and children who were not having enough access to education or no access at all. And the crisis of unemployment in the Arab world is more acute than ever before. Of course, you all know that our nation states have largely collapsed, and our societies have been fragmented, and violence has become a policy by default in many Arab countries. And there is a tendency of many to interpret what is happening from within, that is, look at our societies and hold us rightly responsible for all the ills of those societies. But I think the international community, in both political and humanitarian terms, has a great responsibility, not only in what has happened to us, but in what might happen to us and needs to happen to us. I think I'm not going to dwell on the foreign interventions in a country like Syria, but also I would like to highlight the failure of the international community to intervene in order to prevent major humanitarian crisis and protect the most vulnerable people, young people and children included. Now this conversation will certainly look at all of those issues. We will have perhaps to exchange views on this rise in anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiments. This is not a northern problem. This is not a European problem only. It's a problem here in our countries, in Lebanon in particular. You are all aware that there is a narrative that overemphasizes, exaggerates the burden of Syrian refugees, not just on our economy, but on our societies, and so they kept referring to them time and again as a time bomb. And refugees have been in our midst for more than almost 7 years, and the time bomb did not explode. Which shows, that this narrative needs to be deconstructed. We here at this institute try our best to help speak the truth and make sure the truth is known. We do that with the support and in collaboration with UNHCR, and we're very pleased this is so. One of our recent publications is this little booklet, 101 Facts. It's about facts and figures that the Lebanese need to know when they talk about Syrian refugees. There is a lot of nonsense, but the nonsense that we hear leads to xenophobia, and xenophobia breeds violence. Violence starts as verbal, as moral. It could become real. So the stakes are high for us in Lebanon, those of us who care about civil peace, who care about national concord. I think they've got to be very serious with this. I mentioned the lost generation notion that has been repeated ad nauseam, but justifiably in a way. The lost generation. Is this irreversible? Could we reverse it? Does the international community have ideas about how best we could reverse the process that led to the loss of education opportunities of a whole generation? We are here in an academic setting, and therefore I hope at some point we will hear about collaboration, avenues of collaboration between UNHCR, UNICEF, and academic institutions. And I'm sure that in your visit to Lebanon, is this your third day? Yes. Yeah. In your visit to Lebanon, in your meetings with people like the Minister of Education, those problems pertaining to specifically to education and to higher education has been addressed, and perhaps this is right setting to give this matter some attention. I think I've spoken too much. I rather stop and give our two esteemed guests the floor.
I can start.
Filippo.
I'll start. Thank you, Tariq.
and good morning, everybody. I was just reflecting that 3 years ago, as I was for some time in this university as a fellow, as a very grateful guest, one morning I came to the university, and I said to some of the friends here, I said, what do you think if I put myself forward as a candidate to be the High Commissioner for Refugees? You remember that? And thinking that people would laugh, so would put me back in my place, and then I could carry on doing what I was doing at that time. But actually, I got some encouragement. So I hold this university and this institute highly responsible for putting me in this hot seat, which actually is an interesting perspective on the world. But I am seriously very grateful for that encouragement and everything else that this institution has done. At least I can speak from personal experience in my years at UNRWA and then now at UNHCR, to support, to inform, as Tarek said, the causes which we fight for. So thank you for that. This is a great opportunity, first time back since then, to do this, to say this. I also want to start very briefly, mine will be extremely informal remarks. Yesterday Henrietta and I were first in Baalbek and then in the Bekaa, and two things. One, we were in one of these so-called, I think they call them informal settlements, where Syrian refugees are almost camping near Baalbek, and that was a settlement of about 300 people, where only 10% of the children went to school. This is talking to your crisis issue. But then we were also, because I think needs to give the complete story, we were also in a school in near Zahle, which actually was functioning very well, and where you had a morning shift with mostly Lebanese children, an afternoon shift with Syrian children. I cannot think of any other country in the world where this is happening, where you have such a huge refugee population in proportion to the country that schools are used all day long for nationals and for refugees. I think both situations, which are both coexisting in this country, of crisis and of almost makeshift ad hoc solutions, speak to the theme of this of our conversation today, which is, investing in youth in the context of crisis. Now, my remarks will look at crisis from, as you can expect, the specific angle of the work of my organization, which is also most of my professional expertise, which is, crisis seen from through the lens of forced displacement. Forced displacement is both a result of the crisis and a symptom of the crisis, of the type of crisis we are talking about. And just to give you, we don't want to go into a lot of figures, but just to give you a sense of the global crisis beyond Lebanon or beyond the Syria refugee situation, we're dealing, as you probably know, we estimate at about 67 million the number of people forcibly displaced, meaning by conflict or by persecution or by other forms of violence. This does not include people displaced by other reasons. So it's a large population, and unfortunately a growing one. The other fact, Tarek spoke of facts that I think needs to be dispelled, not so much here at AUB, but in other venues. I have to always remind interlocutors, this is not a crisis of the rich world, as is often portrayed. This is a crisis that affects mostly countries, lower or middle-income countries that are often in crisis themselves. And the root of forced displacement is in the end in countries that are profoundly in crisis, that are either failed states or states that are deep into intractable conflicts. If you take the refugees and displaced that are of Syrian, Somali, Afghan, and South Sudanese origin, just to mention 4 countries, you easily reach a third to half of the total, maybe a third of the population that I have mentioned, 4 countries alone. So it is a large phenomenon, but also identifiable with very specific situations of fragility. And therefore, when you talk about investment in youth or investment in general, in end crisis, and you think of what crisis we're talking about, it's not that easy to make the connection, because investment by definition tends to go towards stability, or where it has a chance to be an investment as opposed to an expenditure or a pure disbursement of resources. So these are the challenges that I think that we need to grapple with. Clearly, and Tariq mentioned this in respect of the Syria crisis, which is the one most affecting you here most. The first thing that one has to say, no matter what, and although you know it very well, the first investment that one has to talk about is the political investment. This is what has been sorely missing from the discussion or from the process in all these crises. Not that political action has been missing, in the sense that, of course, for every one of these crises, there are multiple processes that involve political actors, but because these processes have largely been ineffective. And this lack of effectiveness can be taken back to profound divisions in the international community, starting from the Security Council down to other institutions, which have made it impossible, basically, to create unanimity around political responses, and worse, it have made it possible for those responses to be contradictory. I mean, Tariq was the special representative of the UN in Libya, so I'm sure that he has memories of those divisions, which continue to date. And if you think that even a fairly straightforward resolution, such as that of the Security Council of just a few days ago on Eastern Ghouta, was completely ignored by all the actors on the ground, you can have a measure of how desperately weak those political conflict resolution mechanisms have become. Now, if that, of course, is not addressed at some point, and we can discuss it probably for several days, the rest becomes even more difficult. But it is also clear that, and we, UNICEF, UNHCR, we are organizations used to work in unresolved crises, that we cannot simply say, there's no political solution, so we have to wait for that. We need to respond, and the traditional way to responding to this crisis has been a humanitarian response. That is, I am suspicious of those who say, humanitarian responses lead nowhere, they simply perpetuate. Humanitarian responses are very important. They are responses that meet the elementary needs of people. Humanitarian, from our perspective, means more than just distributing relief items or food. There's a strong element of protection, of a rights-based element of protection, be this for refugees, for children. Henrietta can speak about that more than me. But definitely this is a very important element of the immediate response. But it is very clear, and let me tell you, it has become clear particularly in this region, and particularly maybe in Lebanon and Jordan in the last 5-6 years since the Syrian crisis began, that those humanitarian responses, even when they are enriched, they are strengthened by a protection dimension, are not quite enough. That because these conflicts last forever, because, as I said to the Security Council just a few weeks ago, we seem to have become unable to make peace in the world. The conflicts are likely to be very protracted. The Palestinian conflict is the mother of all protracted conflicts, but there's many others. Think of Afghanistan, think of Somalia. Syria is entering its 8th year, which is not short. So it is clear that other type of investments, even during the crisis, have to be made, which are different from humanitarian responses. and which I would like to propose today really need to look at youth as a main interlocutor, partner, and beneficiary. Why youth? Well, I think we need to say it at the beginning for so many different reasons. Youth, the young people are the most, how can I say, open, the most inclined to embrace innovation, and obviously in this situation you need to be pretty innovative if you want to face, to fight against some stereotypes and some ingrained habits. Youth, of course, are hopefully agents of change in their own communities, which is what you want to have as a partner. Youth can be, and I'm talking about refugee situations here or displaced situations, powerful contributors to the lives of the communities hosting them, but they are also the part of society that has the longest future, and therefore hopefully they will go back home, or they will live in a post-crisis environment where they learn, what they acquired during the crisis will be an investment back into peace building and reconstruction. And on a perhaps more problematic side, youth are also the most exposed to bad solutions. They are the most exposed to the temptation which are rife in this context of radicalization, and worse, of terrorism, where in a situation of scarce resources, when resources are made available, they may come, especially with young people, from the wrong quarter, and they may influence them in the wrong manner, as we have seen in many other places. I'll give you one very quick example. This is one of the things that is worrying us most. For example, in Bangladesh today, where we have by now, between refugees from before and new refugees, 1 million Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, one of the, perhaps together with the Palestinians, the most discriminated population in the world, and the population that, because of its extreme poverty, is hugely exposed to the risk of radicalization. So this is one example where, if you don't have the proper investment even in crisis, even before finding the solution, the risks for entire regions and perhaps globally are very high. There are two areas that, there's many areas of investment, to go back to the theme, where I think it's important to focus our attention. One is, without any doubt, education. I want to give, and I'm sure Henrietta will speak more, they're the experts here, but just to give you a couple of interesting statistics of the refugee population. There's about 25 million refugees in the world. Of these refugees, only about 50% attend school. 50%. This is, I think, I always forget, but I think the global statistics for children of school age is 90% worldwide, people going to school. So 50%, and 23% only go to post-primary schools, and 1% goes to university or to higher education. 1% of the refugee population. So this shows, these are just figures that talk by themselves in terms of the need of investment. Now, for a long time, the response to this was, okay, refugees are in camps, so we need to build schools in camps and give them an education till they go back home. Now, this is very passé, if I may say. Most of the refugees are not in camps. Most of the refugees and displaced people are in cities, actually, these days. So I think it is very clear that the investment in education has to be an investment in national structures, so they can include refugees, but they need additional resources if the countries doesn't have those resources. This is what we saw yesterday in the Beka school. Obviously, if you have a second shift, you need more space, you need more teachers, you need more resources. This is a simple example of what I'm talking about. And this is a difficult proposition. No state likes to invest, raise taxes maybe, to invest more money for a foreign population. It's politically very delicate. Here, And it is politically very delicate in almost every country, especially in the climate that Tariq has described. So this is, there's many other things that I'd like to say about education, but just a few thoughts in the interest of time. The second area, and I think this is even more difficult, is really livelihoods and jobs, basically. Because, of course, people that are forcibly displaced are, as I said earlier, not forcibly displaced in countries where there are jobs, which are a problem everywhere, but in particular, they are a problem in poorer countries. So usually you have refugees and displaced in poor countries. Very often, and we've seen it yesterday, in those countries, they are confined to the poorer areas of the same country, where there is even less investment in the economy, in economic development than in other areas. So they're often penalized many times for a variety of reasons. So livelihoods, creating jobs for refugees, which is really fundamental because, of course, that's the way you wean them off humanitarian assistance, you give them dignity, you prepare them for the future, is extremely difficult in situations where very often the local community faces the same challenges. So clearly, just like for the schools, you need to invest in the overall economy of that particular area, and this is very challenging. But in the last few years, we shouldn't give up on this, difficult as it may be. In the last few years, we've made strides. I was in Jordan just a few days ago, and through a very ingenious scheme that creates favorable export conditions for companies that recruit both refugees and local people, this is now catching. So companies are interesting. They're offering jobs to refugees. They get good export, they get good trade agreements with markets in Europe or the United States. That actually has a positive spin. They make more money. The whole community benefits. So that's, of course, these are small experiments, but I think that there are approaches that if there is a bit of political will, support from donors, and innovation in approach can be adopted. The fact that, and we had this discussion with UNICEF this morning, the fact that increasingly we are moving away from traditional humanitarian assistance, we are going into cash as a means to assist people as opposed to distributing food or cash, so that they are empowered to use, they're empowered to build their own support with cash, is also another way to address the issue of livelihoods and to stimulate even entrepreneurship among young people in a crisis situation. I can give you many examples of that. Quick final points also to reply to respond to some of Tariq's initial points. One is that another way we are really looking at more comprehensive approaches in crisis situation is to, again, move away from the traditional equation whereby this crisis, in terms of people, are handled essentially by governments and by a few humanitarian organizations like UNICEF or UNHCR. Of course, both governments and us remain key to these responses, but it is very clear that we need to broaden this, that we have civil society, especially local civil society, that is both interested and capable of contributing hugely to this inclusive and forward-looking approach. You have the private sector that is increasingly interested in so many different ways that we can talk about. I think this is actually one of the most exciting developments of the last few years, and we've seen quite a lot of it in this part of the world. You have academia that can, as was mentioned earlier, can play a very important role both in advocacy, from the rights point of view, I would say, but also in terms of research, to get the facts right. If you shift from pure humanitarian responses to more complex responses, even in crisis situation, you have to have good data, you have to have good analysis, and this is, I think, where academia can be and is already a valuable partner. UNHCR is leading the preparation of a global compact on refugees. You may or may not know that. This is something that we hope to establish by the end of this year. And one of the premises of the global compact is comprehensive responses. So we are working on creating networks regionally and globally of academic institutions. You are part of this discussion here at AUB, of business councils and other forms of networks of cities, for example. Local communities are the first responders and continue to be throughout those crises. So it's very important. And last but not least, we are also looking at youth as an important actor in this effort, even at the policy level. My final point is that, in many countries, including Lebanon, Tariq mentioned the context here, the complicated context. When you talk about this, when you talk about investing in education, in livelihoods, when you talk about inclusive investment, meaning not just creating an isolated school where you put the displaced people until they can go back, but reinforcing national institutions so that they can absorb and bear the brunt of that additional population until it's there. I think very often you get skeptical response, and the response is what you mentioned earlier. Well, this is just another way to oblige us to keep these people forever, to transfer the crisis from where it belongs, in this case Syria or Palestine. It's exactly like happened 70 years ago with the Palestinians. You transfer it here, and then it's your problem. And then, this great cooperation that is always there in the first couple of years goes away, and these countries are left with... I don't hear this only in Lebanon. I hear this everywhere I go. I hear it in Kenya. I hear it in Pakistan. We start hearing it in Bangladesh today. And I think there is some truth to this, because international tension shifts. And because we've always privileged short-term responses, they remain short-term. So I think that we need to change that equation. We also need to really use the word investment more smartly. Investment is also, as I told your president the day before yesterday, investment in when they go back to Syria. If you have a lost generation of Syrian kids that don't go to school, what are they going to go back to, assuming that at some point they go back? This is a very important food for thought. I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've done a great job in 10, 15 minutes by sort of widening the perspective and discussing the local and the global as they are intertwined. You've raised many questions that are of interest to the younger participants in this room, and they are very engaging questions, so let's hope some discussion around them will take place at the end of this session. To you, Henrietta.
Thank you, Dr. Mitri, and hello everyone. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here in the Policy Institute. So thank you very much for having all of us. And as Filippo mentioned, we have been here visiting a number of schools and with a number of government officials in Lebanon. And at UNICEF, we think about anyone in the age of 18 and under in the world. So my thoughts will be global and also a bit local. And as you probably all know, UNICEF thinks about opportunities. So we think about the ways that young people are an enormous opportunity for the world. So you will hear that reflected. Let me start with just a couple of statistics because I think they're useful. So today, there is a youth bulge, and I think you all know the demographics, but 1.8 billion adolescents and youth between the ages of 10 to 24. It is the largest cohort in the world today, so it is an exceptionally important subject, and it's one that I think the world needs to pay more attention to, and it means that we also need to hear your voices. So this is just the beginning of a good conversation. Our window of opportunity will not be open forever. So part of the puzzle is that 90% of these young people are living in low and middle income countries. And based on the current trends, 9 out of 10 will find employment in the informal sector, and only 1 out of 10 will find it in the formal sector that we have known. In Lebanon, I know that you all are grappling with this challenge, and 1 in 5 people in Lebanon, 30% of the population, is a very interesting statistic. It means that the country is young, but it is not as young as the countries in Africa. And as you look around the world and you look at the demographics, you will find yourself with a variety of challenges that differ by country and by demographic. There is, as Filippo mentioned, a group that is in crisis because of education, a group that is in crisis because of unemployment, and a group that is in crisis because of movement and being disassociated with the communities in which they grew up. Secondary school employment in most countries is low. In Lebanon, Filippo mentioned the statistic of 10% in the refugees populations for Syrians. That's very low percentage. It means that literacy and numeracy and skill building is just not going to be as strong as it could be. So part of our mission is to try to keep young people in school. Young women and girls are particularly affected and vulnerable. 1 in every 5 girls across the region are married before the age of 18. In Lebanon, 27% of the Syrian girls under 18 are married. So you have to ask yourselves, what will be the cost of these types of crises, and what will their lives be like? What opportunities will lie before them? And what do we need to create as a world? We believe that the estimate is that we need to create 600 million jobs over the next decade to keep pace with the number of young people that are entering the labor market. The economies are becoming more digital and more entrepreneurial, and so both become challenges as well as opportunities. In UNICEF, we have reached almost 77,000 people in this country, and we are delivering programs, everything from reading, mathematics, 17,000 children who are out of school. We are reaching them with market-based skills training for more than 27,000 young people. So all of this helps, but it does not solve a problem, and it does not solve a global problem. We also have some innovation labs with help from Germany and the Netherlands. We're training nearly 10,000 youth across Lebanon in digital skills and social entrepreneurship, peer-to-peer business mentorship. And Filippo and I yesterday had a chance to see one of the innovation hubs, and it was really exciting, and you can just see that the opportunities are endless, from technology solutions that heat water and you can cook your dinner at the same time, to apps when you'll know when the buses are going to be arriving at the bus stop so you're there on time, to being a baker, etc. But there are lots of innovations, lots of entrepreneurship that's bubbling in the country, and that's very exciting. At UNICEF, we're also working with the government on a national youth policy. We think that that is going to be extremely important for the future of the country. And we are lending our advice and expertise on a national technical, vocational education and training program and strategy for Lebanon. But we must all do more, and to Dr. Mitri and Filippo's comments about collaboration, I think academic institutions are key to this. It is very helpful to have online training. It's very helpful to have workshops that travel around the country, and classes that are offered free of charge, as well as scholarships. Among students, volunteering is an opportunity. It should be part of all of our lives. As you compose your lives, you'd love to have some time spent in civil society and nonprofit organizations, sometimes spent in government, sometimes spent in business, and sometimes spent in academia. So all those threads become a life that is worth living, and it is important that you think about volunteering. The business community can certainly be helpful. Apprenticeships and internships are going to be extremely important in the future, as they are now. Work-study options, hiring of young people for specialized services, what we often call the gig economy, is going to be very important in the future. we have a number of other institutions that we think have a possibility for here in Lebanon. There's something called U-Report, in which on your cell phone you're able to report things about your country, about schools, about interactions of young people. And it could be very powerful here in Lebanon, so it's something that we would think might be useful. But we'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas, and with that, Dr. Mitri, may I turn it back to you?
Thank you so much for your forward-looking approach and with your emphasis on innovation and on the ways you've been supporting those who within the refugee communities try to innovate.
Well, and we're also supporting those in the Lebanese community. So for
As
us,
well.
yes, for UNICEF, it's for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for two enlightening opening remarks and that open the conversation. Plenty of questions. The floor is to you. تفضلي. You can of course ask questions in Arabic or English.
Jana Nasser, Orthodox Youth Movement. We realized that most of people that are acceptant of refugees or the other are mostly located in rural areas of Lebanon, but also on the borders. And we thought of working with them, with the people of Lebanese nationalities, with different workshops on acceptance of the other, mostly in drama workshops. And at the end of our workshop on the fourth weekend, we included Syrian refugees and Palestinian refugees and realized how people who didn't accept others at the end accepted them. And and that was part of our social cohesion movement. Do you think that UNHCR or UNICEF would be open to shift from humanitarian work to more things that push people to be acceptant of marginalized communities into their lifestyle?
Thank you. Shall I take a few more questions and then please.
Fatima Fakhurji, the head of the student committee with Dafi Scholarship. You were talking about youth contribution to society. Most of us want to go back to Syria, but for the time being, how refugees can integrate with Lebanese society if they are not permitted to work within their majors? Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Professor Hanafi.
أنا أسراء ضيف الله من سوريا. أنا متعاقدة بنشاطات مع UNHCR. من إحدى التحديات اللي بتواجه الشباب بلبنان اليوم وخاصة من اللاجئين والنازحين هي الإقامة والأوراق الثبوتية القانونية، خاصة الشباب اللي صار عمرهم فوق 15 سنة. إلى أي حد المفوضية بعطي أولوية لهذا الموضوع، وهل هي بتسهل أمورنا لحتى نصير نظاميين ونعيش بعدم خوف؟ شكرا كتير.
شكرا. ساري.
Thank you. So my question to Fore, Madam. Well, the way you present UNICEF, it looks like a big non-governmental organization. Frankly, I am expecting from UNICEF more substantial things. I will give one example. I had the expectation that you create a virtual baccalaureate. You know, I mean, we heard from Filippo Grandi the rate of dropout and the rate of education. So I know UNICEF started a process of virtual baccalaureate, but for political reason, they stopped it. And this is the reason why I know thousands and thousands of Syrians, they went to schools, they end up, their certificate is not recognized by any place, and they cannot go to Lebanese university here, etc. So this is what I'm expecting from UNICEF, frankly.
I'll take one more question, and then there will be another round. So,
My name is Giselle. I'm one of Dafi students. Well, in Lebanon, most of the majors require 180 credits to graduate, while in Syria, the number of credits that are required are 240. What are, in your opinion, the way to avoid the extra 1 year of study upon our return to Syria?
a very specific question.
You have to do the extra year.
Let me stop now, and I see a few more hands, so there will be a second round and perhaps a third round. Wallahu alam. So,
Okay. Well, let me start with the first question on the social cohesion. It's a very important area. So UNICEF works from both humanitarian crisis through to development, and that is a continuum in life. That means that you not just look after the moment, that it's not palliative, but that you in fact think about how you can change the life so that there is opportunity and there is growth and there is prosperity and there is peace and cohesion. So it is something that we do work with, and we would love to talk with you afterwards. So please come see us. Thank you. I will leave the UNHCR question to you, Filippo. And on the idea of the virtual baccalaureate, I do not know enough about this. I have heard about this, and it has been briefed to me. And I know that we are trying very hard to make sure that all Syrian students who are in the Lebanese system get to have a certificate as they graduate school, so that there is something that is a certificate and that allows one to carry on in the educational systems. And I know that we have been grappling with this, but let me see if someone here, Tanya, would like to answer. So Tanya, do you want to take my microphone?
I'm Tanya Chavez, I'm the UNICEF representative.
Tanya, speak to the mic.
It was actually a regional initiative from our Amman office, and it is an ongoing project. Unfortunately, it wasn't a political reason. It was the baccalaureate, the IB, did not certify it so far. So the bottleneck is actually not a political one. It's about getting us to have the sufficient quality in an IB certification online across the board. And the initiative is to deliver this not just for Syrian refugees, but actually an IB that could be applied across the world in crises of displacement. So the blockage is actually not it's more a certification one from the international IB system. No, and we're continuing to work on it because we obviously see it as a value not just for this crisis, but for all crises across the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Filippo, on to you.
Yeah, some of the points, trying to maybe regroup them as well. First of all, I thought it was very interesting what we heard about what you said about the work done by civil society in addressing some of the perceptions about coexistence, but also some of the realities about coexistence. You know, it is, let me globalize this response a little bit more. Tariq spoke at the beginning about this emerging, by now emerged, context of growing hostility, xenophobia, anti-refugee, anti-migrant sentiment. This is a very big political reality, not just here. Actually, it's very acute in much better resourced country that host many less refugees or many less migrants. The reality is also very much more nuanced, as you said. And very often, the reality is where the people are, they arrive or they are located, are not at all what is portrayed at the political level, because there is so much manipulation at the political level. Politicians in Europe, including in my country, have found a gold mine in terms of votes, which is create fear for the foreigner, create fear for the migrant, create fear for the refugees. And you know, and the levers are very clear. They threaten our jobs, they threaten our security, they threaten our values. This is really the three big axes, and then there's many others like environment, but the ones that really have a punch on public opinion are these three, because people, especially in the current global situation with economic problems, with the malaise around globalization, people have apprehensions. And instead of being mature, instead of going like you did, where the people are looking at the real problems, trying to address issues of coexistence, to just simply say it's not working, it's a threat, brings more votes than actual work. This is what you're doing here in Lebanon is important for Lebanon, but this is what many other civil society organizations are doing overall. And I think the type of work that you do, which is not humanitarian in the traditional sense, as you said, but really wants to foster coexistence, looks at dialogue, looks at not reconciliation, because this is not a previous fight, but conciliation. I think these are key issues, and we certainly work on these issues. You know, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I met a group of young Syrians, mostly young, not all, that are engaged in this type of initiatives throughout Lebanon, be it through social media or through focus groups or other initiatives. And actually, we have now managed to have them included at times in the political dialogue around the peace process. You know, the special envoy for Syria, Mr. de Mistura, has agreed that they are part of the consultative group. Now, this is just small still, but you understand. So we are trying to but we're trying to make available our resources, our convening ability, also beyond the humanitarian development response into more political work, but of course from a non-political angle. So definitely I think it's very important what you're doing as a reality check and as a way to address the real realities, not the ones that are portrayed by politicians purely for electoral purposes. On registration and documentation, this has been a big issue in Lebanon since the beginning of the Syria crisis, as you know very well. I can make 3 quick points, which I made to the Prime Minister 2 days ago, that we are very happy of one big area of progress, which is registration of births. We are now, Syrian refugee children that are born here can be registered. This was not the case before. So the big risk, there's 145,000 that were born since 2011 here. That's a huge population of children. The risk was statelessness, that these people would have no nationality. So that's been addressed. Then there is the very thorny issue that you know very well of renewal of registration, of residency permits. That was always possible, but at a fee. There was a waiver of that fee, which was the main obstacle for this not happening. So the policy is in place, the implementation is very slow, contradictory, and not always coherent. So we are addressing that, but the Prime Minister, at least he and the ministers are quite focused on this issue. They agree that we need to solve it. The most complicated is, of course, the refugees that have not been registered. Since 2015, there's been no new registration. So you have a population of pre-existing Syrians here that were never registered, and all those that have come through different means. After that, we don't really know, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people are not registered. That, I think, is politically extremely difficult. I'll be very frank with you, but we continue to engage the government on that as well. On the degrees, Henrietta already spoke a bit about baccalaureate. The key issue that we raise in every country is to try and get equivalence, right? So if you have to, the big complication where you have different curricula and different school systems is to have children educated in a different school system and then go back to their school system. This is always complicated. So we are trying to the extent that we can to avoid shocks and problems there. It's not always possible because on the one hand, we are asking for inclusion in the national system. On the other, we're asking for exceptions. So you understand, you have to calibrate what you ask according to political realities, but we try to do our best. I know that in Syria you need to study 1 extra year. I think that's the issue. Well, I'm afraid if you go back, which I wish you can, you may have to study an extra year. It won't harm too much to study an extra year. But this is just a joke. I know exactly the problem is bigger than that you're pointing at. And finally, I think the most difficult one, and I said it in the beginning, is employment. I think the DAFI students here, those that have the DAFI German scholarship, which is a great institution, by the way, that I'm asking other governments to embrace. The big problem, and believe me, I was with UNRWA for almost 9 years, huge educational effort, little employment opportunities for Palestinians, especially here in Lebanon. So I know very well the contrast between investing in education and then having so few outlets. But I said a bit about this in the beginning. We need to be creative. We need to look at sectors in which refugees can work, defend them, expand them to the extent that we can. Sometimes they are not the most rewarding from the human point of view, but let me tell you, Afghan refugees in Iran, they've been there 40 years. They've thrived working in the construction sector. Not the most attractive, but that gave them a foundation on which to build a relative degree of inclusion, if not integration. So it is important to look also at solutions that are not always the best and the most inspiring, but that can be realistically a source of income for the refugees.
I'll take more questions here. هون بس بالصفوف الأولى. Yes, أعطيها الميكروفون. هون بالأول. رفعة إيدها من زمان.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Dana Jabri, and I'm a public relations officer with the NGO in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, named Multi-AIDS Program, MAPS. And we are working with youth, and we're investing in youth. And we hold Educate to Earn and Learn to Innovate, where we are holding an education center, a robotics team, STEM-based classes and courses open to everybody. And we offer free courses to everybody. And we range ages from 14 to the professional level. But our challenge is investment, funding. Getting funders to fund our projects, getting funders to stick with our projects. And so I wanted to know what UNHCR, UNICEF, when we see 200 children, 300 children in our courses who do not have access to a continued education, going through middle school and high school and graduating into college. So we are then providing them with applied-based sciences, right? At least letting them use their time while they are waiting for an education process, perhaps, or to get into the education system here, which they don't have access to. So again, how does UNHCR and UNICEF, how can you support these programs? We're very much in need. Again, I work for MAPS, and we're always constantly having this challenge of, we want to maintain our programs, we see a positive response. We were fortunate to be the first national robotics team, actually Syrian refugee robotics team in Lebanon. And we hope to continue these projects, but again, our main issue is funding. And we wanted to know if UNHCR and UNICEF will be opening proposals to such projects. Thank you.
I know, I saw lots of hands, but I'll give priority to those who raised their hands in the beginning. ورا الصف الثالث الحجاب الأحمر. ايه اوكي تفضل.
مرحبا، انا اسمي مصعب ابن الشيخ عبد الرزاق المر، وانا شاركت مع الامم بكثير من النشاطات يعني، وكانت رائعه، كانت ملفتة للنظر، وكانت بتعلم الثقافه، وكانت بتشجع على كثير من الاشياء. انا بدي اسال عن شغله، كيف بنقدر نحن الشباب اللي بنكون من ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة يكون لنا فرص عمل خاصة، ويكون يعني لنا سبل عيش ومجال يعني نفهم فيه ونشتغل فيه ونقدر نعتمد على حالنا يعني. شكرا.
شكرا لك. تفضل.
اوكي. بونجور، اسمي دانيال بودرغام، أنا ترينر مع اليونيسف ببروجي Participation Action Research، البحث التشاركي. نحن صلنا تقريبا شي سنتين موجودين بالمشروع وهلا صرنا بمرحله جديده. عندي شوي اسئله محدده تحديدا لها علاقه بهذا المشروع. بهذا المشروع نحن عم نوصل لمحل نقدر نوصل يصير في مجلس اقليمي شبابي بالدول الموجوده، لبنان، الاردن، سوريا، وممكن ينفتح مشاريع جديده. المطلوب بس نقدر نعرف اذا هل يا ترى ممكن هذا المجلس يوصل عنده صلاحيات كافيه بالنسبه للشباب ليقدر يتدخل في حاله التدخل على الارض، وكمان بمحلات معين يقدر ينقل الصوت بشكل بارز جدا. علما انه نحن كنا عم نواجه مشكله وبعدنا عم نواجهها، هي علاقتنا بالميديا تحديدا. يعني نحن صرنا فتره عم نشتغل وما في ميديا بالضبط عم تقدر تضوي على نوعيه شغلنا اللي عم نقدر نشتغله. فيمكن بمحل معين الميديا تقدر تساعدنا بهذا المجلس اذا كان عندنا هيدي الصلاحيات الكافيه. بس بدي احب ضوي على شغله صغيره كمان. من خلال مسيرتنا بهذا المشروع وقت اللي بلشنا كباحثين وصلنا لنتيجه كتير كبيره بانه في ديبرشن كتير كبيره موجوده قدام الشباب بهذه المنطقه، ويمكن بطرق الحل اللي عم نقدر نشتغل عليها يمكن شويه مشاكل نفسيه صارت اكثر من قبل. يمكن صرنا بحاجه لانه نعالج بهذا الموضوع بغض النظر عن توظيف والتعليم وغير مجالات. ثانك يو.
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله.
Hello.
يلا شوي.
Hello.
I will take two from there, then to you, then let me see.
اسمي ماريا إليسا مخلوف. أنا باحث.
يا ريت تختصروا بس شوي.
أوكي باختصار.
Please be brief. Yes.
أنا كمان كنت باحثة بمشروع البحث التشاركي مع الشباب بالشرق الأوسط مع يونيسف. سؤالي هو إنه نحن وقت اللي طلع معنا بيانات كتير مهمة من الشباب عن احتياجاتهم وتطلعاتهم، قدرنا نقوم بحملة مناصرة صغيرة. إنما هل هيدي البيانات هي بمتناول يد وكالات الأمم المتحدة هلأ ورح تكون عم تاخدها بعين الاعتبار بالسياسات يلي رح تعتمدها؟ وسؤالي كيف كمان رح نقدر نشارك عدد أكبر من الشباب ما يكونوا فئة مستهدفة إنما يكونوا شركاء، وكيف عم تصير التعاون بين UNHCR ويونيسف وغير وكالات أمم متحدة حتى ما تكون المشاريع عم تتكرر وعم تستهدف نفس الناس دايما وعم في ناس ما عم يوصل لها أي مشاريع وبرامج.
شكرا. أنا بتمنى عليكم تسألوا سؤال واحد مش 3 4 5. تفضل.
كيف ممكن نحل مشكلة انه بعض معظم اللاجئين يروحوا على المدارس وهن ما عم بيروحوا بسبب حاجتهم للعمل لتوفير لقمة العيش، بسبب معظم اللاجئين مش عم بيروحوا على العلم عشان ما في عندهم معين ما في عندهم معين يوفر لهم لقمة العيش.
صحيح. Sir.
Yes, thank you. Briefly, my colleague Lana Khattab and myself, we conducted a baseline study here for UNICEF in Lebanon last year, and one of the things that we realized was when it comes to the theme of investing in youth, there is this problem of moving from humanitarian, right, emergency actions to development. And how much do you want to move there? Because, of course, are you then actually engaging in state building? So, and can you, which I mean both of you, can you replace the welfare state itself that may not be functioning? So that would be an interesting question to hear comments on.
I saw your hands, but let me give a chance for the two speakers to comment on what they have heard. It's a bit like a question and answer session. I had hoped that it will be more of a conversation, which means that you just don't ask questions, but also give your opinion. Try to be brief, but give your opinion, not just ask questions.
Yeah, I because there were so many questions asked, and in the spirit of trying to create dialogue, maybe I'll take them I'll take 2 or 3. First of all, very much agree on 2 points that I want to make. One is the point made by a young speaker about why children don't go to school. Actually, just to make things clear, because I think there were several statistics, the 10% was the place where we were yesterday in a specific settlement. It's actually much higher, the percentage of Syrian children that go to school. It's about 50, I think. It's still very low. It's the average of refugees worldwide, but given the level of scholarization here in Lebanon, I think we need to push it much higher, but it's not 10%. Still, a lot of kids don't go to school, and I think the main reason is that exactly. It's not so much that the system cannot absorb. The system, with proper investments, can absorb. It is that they simply need to work because there's no other alternative. That is a profound truth. That's why the two type of investments, education and employment, are so closely related to each other. So you need to do both in order to succeed in both. We haven't spoken about this, but I'm sure Henrietta, and she knows much more than me about this. We were quite intrigued yesterday by so many mentions of not just education in a traditional way, but skills training. You know, we need to invest more, perhaps, in making young people able to take up jobs through appropriate technical skills training. So this is a window of education that I think, not just here in Lebanon, we need to really develop much more. The other question on which I agree very much is that of disabilities. Again, yesterday we heard that in several places, and I don't think that we have been all that good, especially in this large crisis like here. I think sometimes we tend to not overlook, but maybe not focus enough on people with special needs. So I take this as an invitation to do more in a very important area, which was also what we heard yesterday. To all those that spoke, and there were several, about need for funding or need for your project and your activities to get more attention, be it financial attention or media attention, sure. And you know that United Nations organizations like ours are open to dialogue, to proposals, but in the end, you know, this is a competitive environment, sorry to say. You have to produce good quality work. It's not any projects or any activity that will get media attention and that will get financing. And you know, if I have 2 or 3 pieces of advice, quality has to be good, which means that you have to show what impact the project will have. I think it is very important that you have a strong innovation dimension in what you propose, because there are a lot of groups with a lot of projects that prosper around or flourish around these situations. And if I may say, and here I speak for the UN, in order to get UN support, it cannot be a politically biased project. I know this sounds difficult in a situation in which politics are very important. Politically biased or politically oriented projects are fine, are great. It's a right of all refugees to have political opinions. But if you want to have funding and to have support, we have to be very careful to remain non-political in those responses, which is very difficult in a very political situation. And this, of course, leads me to the whole question of how much we get involved beyond the humanitarian. I think humanitarian remains, we shouldn't go away, but we definitely need, I don't know if that's state building, but certainly it's state reinforcing until there is a solution to this problem. And here I look at Lebanon. The issue of settlement here of refugees, as you know very well, all of you better than me, is the most sensitive of all. It started with the Palestinians, and now it is very much transferred into the Syrian issue. And I think that we need to be careful. So I don't think we talk about building institutions, permanent institutions for these refugees, but we want them to be included in national institutions that, like the schools we saw yesterday, with proper investments temporarily until it is needed. Now, if those investments also contribute in the long term to the welfare of Lebanon and Lebanese communities, all the better. We got many requests yesterday to do more in the water sector, especially in the border areas. Of course, anything that we will do there should not be just for the refugees, should be for the communities, so that when the refugees go away, you have better infrastructure. This is not too difficult conceptually, and I think also politically can be explained. So that's the. I'll stop here. There's many other things, but maybe Henrietta can complete.
So I will put my private sector hat on. How many of you are from private for-profit businesses? All right, so that's part of what's missing in the discussion.
Yes.
So you want to have some partners out there that are part of every sector of society. And when you're thinking of raising money from partners or raising expertise, they are one of the essential partners that you need. They'll be helpful on technology, on work-study programs, on apprenticeships, on seed capital. When we had a chance to speak with the Prime Minister, he was interested in venture capital. So whether you're in a robotics startup or whether you are in any kind of other activity, entrepreneurship is a way to leap over barriers that exist because you have a better idea. To Filippo's point, it's a very good idea, and you always know that you're doing well when you get your first customer. So when you do, for whatever your idea is, when you get your first customer and they're willing to pay you a little something for it, then you've got a chance to go to a venture capital fund and look for some funding. I think Filippo and I are both taking away from this that we want to hear from you all and reach out. If you have any programs that you think we should be backing, that we could be, budgets are always tight, but there's always room for a good voice and a good program. So come to us on that. My second thought is we've been thinking about a young people's initiative in the United Nations where all the UN agencies would be involved. So it's not just our two, it's all of us, it's all the countries, and it's businesses and foundations. And as such, we have two questions of which you could help. So to Dr. Mitri's point about a conversation. One is, increasingly we are hearing, please pay attention to mental health. There is too much sense of a lack of belonging, of a lack of community, of depression, of frustration, of anger. So please help us on mental health. That is one that we would like you to pay attention to. The second is skills. We don't feel that we are ready for the world that lies ahead. So we want skills that will really let us succeed. So, to you, what skills would you like to learn about? What should we be putting in national education systems? What should we be doing in after-school programs? What should we be encouraging? What can we put online? What could all of our civil society nonprofit partners be offering? So, any thoughts or ideas would be very welcome.
The young lady there, yeah, تفضلي.
Thank you for the chance. First of all, Elisa Qasim from Youth for Development. I will speak in Arabic. نحن مؤسسة محلية هدفها تطوير الشباب وتطوير مهاراتهم من خلال الفوكيشنال تريننج. نحن شهاداتنا معادلة وصرنا نحن جمعية أسست من 1984 سوري. عم ناخد فاندز من محلات مثل الEU، من جهات مثل الRDPP، Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs وإلى آخره، مما يدل على أنه نحن عنا credibility وعنا quality بالeducation يلي عم نقدمها. عنا القدرة على أنه نشتغل مع persons with disabilities، وإضافة لذلك بنقدم تسهيلات للطلاب بعد ما يتخرجوا من عنا لدخولهم الجامعات. متأسفة عم بحكي يمكن شوي زيادة، بس أنا بدي فرجيك الكواليتي اللي نحن بنقدمها، ومع ذلك ما عم نقدر إنه نحصل على أي فاندز من UNHCR أو اليونيسف، ومنلاحظ إنه دايما الفاندز بتروح لنفس الأشخاص، وعادة بيكونوا international NGOs يلي هن بيكونوا مسؤولين عن إنه يوزعوا لل NGOs. شو هاي ليه المشكلة؟ سوري سؤال منه اقتراح، لأنه عم نقدم اقتراحات وما عم تنقبل.
يعني خليني افهم جيدا سؤالك، لان بعتقد بيقدر يكون كثير مهم. انت عم بتقولي انه المنظمات الدوليه احيانا بتفضل مؤسسات غير حكوميه اجنبيه على مؤسسات وطنيه مثلكم. يعني خلينا نحط السؤال بسياق اعم من قضيه محدده. تفضل.
Sorry, I just got handed the microphone. So my name is Lorenzo Guicciardini. I'm a student at the AUB Policy Institute. Sorry, she just handed it to me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'll make it quick.
هذا انقلاب. It's a coup d'état.
Could I just mention that we also work with national NGOs, and I think Filippo does too, just so that you know.
So my question is mostly for Signor Grandi, because you've worked for UNRWA and UNHCR. As you know, the great Donald Trump has made the very wise decision to cut funding to UNRWA. So in a couple of months, they will be dry out of funds, which means 5 million Palestinian refugees will be out of health care, education, and other services. You were stressing the need for education, how youth can be very vulnerable in areas such as the Middle East. And we were wondering, we were conducting a study actually, when UNRWA will, if eventually it runs out of funds, if it cannot get substantial fundings from new sources. So in the event that it dies out, would it be possible for UNHCR to have kind of supplement the lack of funding or supplement the services of UNRWA, and what implications would this have for the controversial Palestinian identity as refugees?
Okay, I'll take one from here. Inti. Last row, she has had her hand
me too.
long before you. So give her the floor and then you will speak. Yeah, long before you.
Thank you, Dr. Tariq. Hello, everyone. I'm Layana Dani. I'm Syrian student at AUB. First of all, thank you all for this discussion. I just want to shed light on a very important issue, which is the north of Lebanon. All your discussions and visits are always concentrated to Bekaa and Baalbek. In north of Lebanon, there is a huge population of refugees, and it's been neglected by international organizations. However, there is UNHCR and UNICEF that are providing support to refugees in North Lebanon. However, not all the services are being delivered. For example, in Akkar, these refugees are in the hands of people who are opening NGOs on behalf of refugees, but these NGOs are corrupted. So, to what sense are you planning to expand honest and services that cover all Lebanon for all refugees? Another question is the Lebanon is not a signatory. Just one. It's not a signatory on the 1951 Refugee Convention. However, why you're not pushing for a temporary law like the one in Turkey for refugee consideration in order to avoid the clashes of residency permit, because refugees are going and renewing their residency permit, and on the other hand, they are refugees. So this is a big clash. Thank you.
Look, there are more than 10 hands, and I don't know how to handle this. We've got 10 more minutes, and we have to conclude by 11 sharp, no matter what. Tfaddal.
Two more.
Hello. I'm Samer Sfer from Sharik NGO, and I have a solution, not a question. So the problem, one of the main problems we're having with vocational training programs, digital programs, is that the job integration rate is very low. So worldwide, it's usually 30%. We have less than 5% in Lebanon. So since we work in job integration, we launched a platform called ProAbled, which has 50% for people with disabilities. And we have a rate of employment of 40% among our programs. So my question is, can we collaborate with UNICEF, since we're proposing to you? Sorry. So we have more than 40% job integration. We're proposing to UNICEF to collaborate with you to support more than 500 persons find jobs, not only train and get technical training. So, and we proved ourselves, we're training also in Sultanate Oman, we're training in many places. So why don't you use our services? We're now proposing this to UNICEF, and we think that we can do a really good job, especially that we're collaborating with UN Global Compact, and we're collaborating with more than 100 companies in Lebanon.
You know, let me, I mean, we still have a few more minutes, but I mean, quite a few people are telling us the story of their NGOs and making requests to the international organization. This is not what this conversation is about. It's about issues that have been raised, and I would like to hear more from you, ideas, criticisms of policies, not just requests from your own organization. That's not the platform for that. There are many other platforms for such a conversation. There are 20 hands. Yeah, كل شوي بيزيدوا الله يبارك. Mr. Anton. And then you, and then, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. This has been great, and thank you for sharing the statistics with us. The landscape has been changing. We all know this. It's really hard to separate between relief, recovery, and development, and there's so much integration between all this. Youth is an important thing. What you said about the numbers and the jobs that we need to create in the coming years is really very challenging. So I want to share 3 points. The first is about vocational training. A lot of us do vocational training. It's not enough to do vocational training. It has to be tied to finding jobs for people. And this is, if you train people without getting jobs, they get more frustrated. The second thing, we need to start thinking also about the numbers. It's not just to have big beneficiary numbers. Creating jobs needs a lot of money. And it's much more expensive. We need to be aware of this. We need the donors to understand this and to work together on it. And the third point I want to make is multi-year programs. When you are talking about making a difference and having a good impact in a certain community, you really need to go and have sustainable funding in a way for a few years so that you can start the program, do the research that you want to do, and then have a good impact on the ground. Thank you.
I'm afraid it's not going to be possible to give all of you the floor. I think the hand that was raised first is the one in the middle. So let her speak, then you, then the lady here, and I will conclude.
Merci, thank you. My question is a policy question, and obviously it's not something that necessarily be dealt with by your institutions, but it's something that nobody's talking about. We have a very large young male population from Syria living here who, even if they wanted to go back and rebuild their country, are afraid to because of conscription. And I think at the international level there needs to be some dialogue with the Syrian government so that when, inshallah, ya Rab, the war ends, young men can go back and help rebuild their country. And we're talking about jobs, but you know, we all know people and live among people who, they might want to go back now, but they can't because they're afraid of getting taken by the Jayesh. So I really just wanted to raise that issue as a major international policy issue that needs to be talked about. And we're talking about young people as well, because from the age of 18 to 24, they're eligible until I think 43.
Sure. Azra,
good morning. My name is Joelle Badran. I work for UNICEF. I'm not going to ask any question. I'm just going to answer Samer. Is that we met and you had a great idea and we're still waiting for the written proposal. Thank you.
تفضلي. Here. That will be the last. I'm really sorry for all of you. I know there are another 20 people who wanted to speak.
Sorry to be the last. I work for UNESCO, and as you know, UNESCO is also a culture sector, and we believe a lot in the power of culture and what this represents and means for the refugees and the displaced people. And we propose vocational training for young people in the use of traditional techniques, material and knowledge in order to reconstruct the heritage in Syria. So this is something that we propose. We believe that it is important for the young generation also to know what is the tradition, and And we note that this is also important for their identity and dignity. So this is some...
Well, thank you very much.
Maybe this time we start with you.
Okay. So I will tag in on the very first question that we do have offices in the north, in Tripoli and in Arkar, and so please come to see us. On the item for the application to UNICEF, I think we've had a response, which is very good. On vocational training and finding of jobs and that inexorable link, I think that is extremely important, and it's one that we have to bake into each of our programs. But it's difficult, and we have to do it with partners. So that's why it's really important that our business partners are here. And your point on young men being able to return, it is a serious issue, and it is one in which if we can give educational opportunities to the young Syrian men that are here, being literate and numerate is a good start in life. And so it is essential that we at least get to that point. And so UNICEF's programs, among others, are those that are really focusing on that. And then life skills training and making sure that the world that they see before them is one that is filled with opportunities. But I will turn that over to Filippo. Thank you very much.
I will also answer a few of the points, of the many good points. One is really there is no discrimination between national and international partners. Actually, you may or may not know that the humanitarian community globally has made a commitment 2 years ago at the World Humanitarian Summit to raise the partnerships or the investment in partnership with national NGOs to certain percentages, and we're trying to work in that direction, encouraging not only ourselves but also donors to provide money that can be used for national partners. But then you go back to the whole issue of quality, of independence, of non-politicization. And many times these are the obstacles that are in the way. It's not that just anybody can make a proposal and gets funding. It would be great, but funding is limited and has to be carefully utilized. But there are also other ways to do fundraising beyond like some of you mentioned, beyond the United Nations organizations. On North Lebanon, I would just like to say that yes, we have also presence and work in Akkar and other places, and we will, certainly we will make sure that there's balance, but there's certainly no intention of discriminating any area compared to others. There's maybe more needs in some areas compared to others, but we try to address all. Many of you mentioned again the issue of employment. I think this is really the key, but you see, then we need to look beyond this. Our projects are very important, but we need to look beyond that if we want to talk about creating employment. Lebanon is going into not just one big conference in Brussels where we will put forward humanitarian needs and refugee support. There's a conference on security coming up. There's a conference on investment and capital investment plan in Paris. Success in those conferences is indispensable also for the support to refugees, because that's how, hopefully, but we know all the constraints and the limitations, you create an economic context in the country that is more conducive to also employment of refugees. But we'll continue to focus on that. I just want to say that on return, that is an important point, but actually, and you may be skeptical about that, you will be surprised. We at UNHCR in this case, because this talks directly to our mandate, to our issues, we're engaged in complicated but still ongoing dialogue with the government of Syria on some of these issues, which is not just conscription, but is the broader issue of amnesties that may be necessary at some point in the case of return of people. So nobody should be held responsible for having left the country. This unfortunately can be an issue. Of course, you understand we go there into a lot of political considerations, but we're certainly looking at the technical legal level. We're looking at exemption from conscription. We're looking at amnesties. We're also looking at a whole array of legal issues that refugees here in Jordan, in Turkey, are very worried about. Can I get back my property that may be occupied by others? Or how can I prove, how can I give evidence that I own an apartment or some land? These issues are very big. For some refugees, for many, they're bigger even than saying I want to go back to a house, I don't have access to schools. These are important issues, but the legal protection issues are very key, including conscription. The dialogue is very difficult. There is no significant return at this point, as we know, but I think it's important to prepare the ground not just materially, but also legally and institutionally. So it's an important point that you make. And the final point on UNRWA, can UNHCR take over UNRWA? The answer is very clear, no. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for this very lively conversation. I apologize again for those of you who were not given a chance to speak, but the time constraints being known to all of you. Please join me in thanking our two esteemed guests for their patience and for their remarks in response to yours.